Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of Voices of Impact, where we talk with organizations and people making a difference. Today, we have with us Ruthe Farmer, founder and CEO of the Last Mile Education Fund. Unlike traditional scholarship programs, Last Mile takes an abundance approach by investing in broader group of students committed to technology and engineering. By addressing challenges beyond their control, Last Mile aims to increase diversity in tech industry and boost economic mobility for women and minorities. Ruth's extensive background includes roles at CS for All, the Obama White House, and the National Center for Women and IT, making her a true champion for tech inclusion and innovation. So, a warm welcome to Ruthe Farmer.
Hi, nice to see you.
It's wonderful to meet you, and it's just so amazing what you have done over the years. And reading about you, it was so interesting because in India, when it comes to engineering and STEM related studies, everyone is for it, and everyone wants to be there in the US to pursue a higher education, to feel a bit more included, and to progress in life in general. So it's very interesting to see what Last Mile Education Fund has been doing over the years, and it's very niche. And I would like to ask you, what was that one pivotal moment where you felt that there is a requirement of such a foundation, and this would really help the society a lot, and women in particular, to progress?
Sure. So, sort of the origin story of the Last Mile Education Fund is
Yeah.
over my career, really since about 2001, I've been building various programs to get mostly more women or students from diverse backgrounds into STEM, technology, engineering. And some of those programs were middle school, some of them were high school, some of them were early college. And because of the beauty of social media, I basically had a front row seat to the lives of all of these students because we were Facebook friends, or I knew them on Instagram and LinkedIn. And so I'm kind of watching them go through the program and sort of acting like a career fairy godmother for them. And over, there would be times when a particular student would hit a bump, and they're just, I would use my capital or my social capital or my networks to solve it for them. One particular student actually was an Indian young woman who was a first generation immigrant from India, but she was living in New Jersey and doing really well, had started at community college, got her GPA up, transferred to the New Jersey Institute of Technology. And tragically, at the end of her freshman year internship, her mother, quite young, had a heart attack and died while they were on a trip. And so that was extremely disruptive to her education and her grades. And she had an internship that she'd been awarded by one of the big tech companies in California. And when they got her grades for that next term, they canceled her internship because her grades were lower than they had been. And fortunately, I knew they had a diversity at that company, and I contacted him and I was like, hey, here's the real story. This kid is incredible. She just had a tragedy happen 2 weeks before school started. And obviously it's going to cause a dip. And I actually just saw on LinkedIn that she just took a big job at IBM, and she's been in the workforce now in information security for a number of years. And so it's those interventions that I was doing. I was like, this is great, but I'm one person and not every student knows me, or I'm not seeing every person's problem in front of me. And so I sat down actually with another student and her professor, my co-founders, Ryan and Sarah, and we're like, we got to figure out how to scale this, right? How do we scale having someone step in when there's a problem? And so we were seeing a lot of students who were like, I have an internship, but I can't physically get there because you have to pay up front to travel. Or a student who was like, my car broke down, in the middle of the term, and now I can't get to my 2 jobs. and
Mm-hmm.
walk this tightrope I need to walk of like working two jobs and going to school. The car
Mm-hmm.
was necessary. And
Yeah.
so we're like doing the kinds of things that would be done by your parents if they could afford it.
Yeah.
And so we're kind of acting like that safety net
Mm-hmm.
for low income students that, is handled by parents of affluent students every single day.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I really like the fact that what Last Mile Foundation is essentially doing is kind of leveling the field for these students. And I also see that one of your co-founders is also a benefactor of Last Mile Foundation. I think her name is Ryan.
Yeah, Ryan is incredible and like overcame so much adversity just getting herself to college, getting herself through college,
Mm-hmm.
and opportunities have a cost. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of our programs are and our employers are like, oh well, this student, they had all these prestigious summer things they did in high school. Those come at a cost. And
Mm-hmm.
so some kids can afford those prestigious summer prep programs and some can't. Ryan did all that herself. Like, she figured this all out herself. She didn't have parents who came from engineering or from technical, professional jobs. She had to kind
Mm-hmm.
of navigate this whole thing on her own. And so for her, like, it was literally whether or not she had a few $100s to get herself to the internship that was going to get her the job, that was going to get her. And she's married now. She's got a adorable baby boy, and they're building a house, and been in industry for a number of years, but also a huge, huge, huge advocate for other students like herself, which,
Wonderful.
we have this whole virtuous circle model. So we're
Mm-hmm.
investing in students who are what we call striving students. So
Mm-hmm.
if you've made it to your junior year in a technical field, you've proven yourself and you
Yeah,
need to graduate. I don't
yeah.
care what your GPA is. I don't care what your prior, I'm investing in your future, not rewarding you for your past. And so
Mm-hmm.
we take this approach of like, we're going to take an abundance approach to who qualifies. We're
Mm-hmm.
taking an abundance approach to what qualifies. I don't care if you want to spend the money on interview clothes or a laptop or gas for your car. Whatever is the barrier to you and your persistence, that's what we're here to solve. We have paid for students to cremate their parents
Mm-hmm.
because their parent died while they were in school and they're the oldest kid in the family. Somebody has to pay for that funeral. So if you're
Mm-hmm.
going to have to drop out of school over the cost of a $700 cremation bill, like, that's tragic, given that you've got so much invested in that education. That's the other
Mm-hmm.
way we talk about this is like, by the time you get a young person from birth through growing up, going through K-12 school, add
Mm-hmm.
some premium for all the STEM outreach education we do, and then 2 years of college, we've calculated that's $477,000 of sunk costs in the US. So why wouldn't we spend $1,000, $5,000, $10,000, even $20,000 to get them to graduation and a degree where they're going to earn on average six figures within a couple of years,
Yeah.
versus the alternative, which is years of debt and work, but no
Mm-hmm.
actual degree to like
Mm-hmm.
launch you into the field. We have a massive talent shortage in technology in the United States. We need
Mm-hmm.
700,000 cybersecurity workers. They've
Mm-hmm.
estimated 500,000 open jobs in tech. Now with AI, there's way more, things are opening wide open.
Possibilities.
And so
Mm-hmm.
like, so many possibilities, and we
Mm-hmm.
need the talent.
Mm-hmm.
And letting students who have raised their hand and said, I want to be a technologist, fail over something as stupid as a car repair is
Yeah.
dumb
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
short-sighted. So I'm trying to kind of bring us back around to taking an investment approach to education.
Mm. That's really interesting because most of the top university they seek out for students who are the creme de la creme or the cream layer, and they look out for the best GPAs without not quite understanding that sometimes GPAs are also a product of privilege, where you get to, consistently study, regular, submit your assignments, and get all your work done. And I really like the concept and how niche it is, and it is really giving solutions to problems as they come. And with that, I would also like to understand, like, where does diversity factor in last mile education fund? Like,
Well, so our primary target audience is um, students from low socioeconomic status
mhm,
communities and families,
mhm,
right? Um, and we started out funding primarily women because I had spent my whole career in gender equity. And so it was
yeah,
really easy to raise money for that, right?
yeah,
Um, but now we've begun to expand, and we have
mhm,
a program that's nationwide for community college students in cybersecurity. That's for any student, any gender, any race. So the
mhm,
first like qualifier is, are you from a low income community or background? Like, do you need the money?
mm,
That's number one.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and if you look at the national data, people from underrepresented groups, people of color, so Black, Latino, Native Americans, they require more financial aid to go to college. A
mhm,
higher
mhm,
percentage of them rely on financial aid. Um, those communities are poorer than white and Asian communities typically. And
mm,
so
yeah,
we've been doing this now for 5 years. We've funded over 8,000 grants,
mm,
and that represents a little over 7,200 individual students, because we do give students another grant if they need it.
mhm,
Um, and our numbers are roughly 40% Black students, about 20% Hispanic students, about 13% of white, about 13% Asian.
mm,
And then there's a bunch of sort of other in there. And so
mhm,
we're trending to be a more diverse group than what you would see nationwide, but
mm,
we're sorting for poverty first.
mm.
And so
Okay.
once you put that poverty filter on it, then you get a higher percentage of people of color.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And what I would like to understand is, what are some of the strategies that Last Mile Education Fund employs to get the necessary financial support, since you're supporting like so many students?
So a couple of things. When we first launched, most of our funding came from philanthropists, from the philanthropy sector,
Mm-hmm,
high net worth individuals and foundations.
mm-hmm,
And then we started to partner directly with employers, with corporations like Microsoft, like Capital One, that are, they're interested in hiring talent, obviously. And what's unique about our program is the students that we are funding are 6 to 18 months from graduation.
mm,
So you're not taking a 4 year or a 6 year bet here. Like, if you give a
mm,
scholarship to a high school kid to study engineering, they might graduate with an engineering degree in 4 to 7 years.
mm,
You can't guarantee they're going to stay in that degree program. You can't guarantee they're going to stay in college. Whereas if you
mm,
invest in a student who's in their last mile, you
mm,
know their major. They're not changing their major their junior or senior year.
mm,
You know exactly where they're going to school, when they're going to graduate. And so you're just bridging that late stage, last mile gap, right?
mm.
So the ROI is 6 to 18 months. You make that
Yeah.
investment, and in 6 to 18 months, you have someone ready to work. So a
Mm,
lot of the corporations are really excited about this because,
mm,
one, um, it's a talent pool, and
mm.
it's probably the largest untapped talent pool we have. Is
True. Yeah.
this population of students graduates at a rate that is so much lower than affluent
Mm,
students. And so to
mm,
me, it's like, this is low hanging fruit. Why would I try to go convince a 16-year-old to study computer science when I can pay a few $1,000s and make sure that all of these students who are already studying computer science graduate? Like,
yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's just a missing piece of the puzzle. I'm not saying we should not do all those
Mm,
investments on the front end and
mm,
inspiring kids and bringing them into the system, but
mm,
I'm concerned about pushing kids into a system in which so many of them are going to fail. And
Yeah.
so, the national data for the United States, only 20% of students in the bottom two income quartiles graduate college in 6 or 8 years.
Oh,
That's tragic. That's 80%.
yeah.
Like, so if we can get that number closer to the number for affluent kids, which is around like 70%,
Mm,
we're capturing all this talent, leveraging all this prior investment, and getting people out of poverty and into a professional job in less than 2 years. It's
mm,
there's no downside.
mm, mm.
And our
So,
average
yeah.
investment per student is $1,100.
Oh,
Like, it's so nominal. It's such a small amount of money.
mm. And I would just like to understand, were the corporates, your corporate partners who are collaborating with you in the Last Mile Fund, were they in it? Were they onboarded like since the beginning? Were
Some
they
of
excited
them,
about the prospect of? Okay, okay,
yeah,
yeah,
some, like Capital One actually was our first corporate partner, and they came in
yeah,
straight out of the gate in 2020.
mm-hmm,
And I think it's really interesting to see, like, some of them just get it. They're like, oh my gosh,
mm-hmm,
this is
yeah,
this is absolutely, it makes sense. Others have a really hard time um understanding that what we're doing is very different than a traditional scholarship.
yeah,
And
yeah,
you said it before, like, a lot of the programs, the elite schools, the scholarships are like, we want to find the best of the best. We want to find the outliers.
mm,
And um I would argue that so many of those markers that we look for an outlier,
mm,
how many competitions have they won? How high is their GPA? What prestigious things have they done? Those things are much more predicated on your parents' income and how much
mm,
time you have and
yeah,
how much security you have than anything else. It's not an indication of your innate talent. We overvalue those types of markers, but we undervalue this student, like, worked and put themselves through school, and they failed a class, but they went back and took it again because they're
mm,
committed. Like, that level of persistence and grit, it's hard to pinpoint and measure, but it's an extremely valuable trait.
yeah,
And so what I'm arguing for is, like, maybe these students would be outliers if they had reliable
mm,
transportation, a good device, internet access, food, and housing.
yeah,
And 62% of the students who ask us for help say that they sometimes or always worry about having enough food.
mm,
How are you
mm,
supposed to get an engineering degree, the most cognitively demanding thing, while you're hungry? Like, it doesn't
yeah,
make any sense. Like, of course, we want building our technology to be doing that with all their brain power on board.
yeah,
So let's make sure that they have their basic needs met so they can become state of the art engineers and build state of the art technology. Like, it just makes sense. Asking people to do that in a scarcity environment
mm,
is not, it's just not a good strategy.
yeah, yeah. It totally makes sense. And so I would like to know a bit more about some of the success stories that are your personal favorites from the Last Mile Education Fund.
Sure. I mean, we have so many, so many,
Yeah,
and it's so fun to see them. I just saw online the name of one of our grantees who was celebrating 2 years at Uber. And,
yeah,
2 years ago, we were funding her to finish her degree, and now, boom, she's at Uber. Um, yeah, we've got some incredible stories. We funded a young woman in New York who had kind of didn't have computer science in her high school, entered college, wasn't quite sure, like, spent a little time figuring it out. And so didn't start the computer science major until she was a junior. And so
mhm,
she didn't have time to do an internship and had to take some summer classes. We funded her summer classes so she could graduate within her scholarship, which was only 4 years. And then literally took a job as a nanny.
mhm,
And I'm like, you have 6 months to launch from your finishing your degree, you have 6 months to jump into that tech job before your skills start to get stale.
Mm.
And so we worked with her, took her to one of the big conferences, and now she's in a pretty impressive software engineering role at one of the big banks. And then we got sort of a big personal gift from her boss, like, because he was like, wow, I got her thanks to this program. And we've got and I do want to stress that, like, the students that we're supporting, I would not in any way characterize them as deficient or less than.
Mm.
I mean,
Mhm.
they're
Mhm.
poor and they're struggling at times, not because they're not smart, but because they don't have the same resources as everyone else. I mean, we've had students who got 14 offers, like,
Wow.
and started in the, like, you know, 160 and above range
Mhm.
in their corporate jobs. So they're definitely not necessarily second tier students. They're
Mhm.
just students who had to overcome obstacles to get to their degrees.
Mhm.
And so watching those students then, like, jump into these six-figure jobs, and then they come back. One of my favorite stories was a student who it was 2020, so we know all what happened in 2020 for the whole world
Yeah.
was really
Yeah.
challenging. And this was really right before the COVID shutdown. This student a had three jobs, lived off campus to save money, and so was juggling like three jobs, going to school, and the car broke down, and the car repair was $1,200, and
Wow.
that knocked out 2 months of rent. So
Mhm.
here this student has, like, I have to fix the car or I can't make enough money
Mhm.
to pay my rent. And so fixing the car meant no rent. So here was this student at a prestigious, historically Black college, interviewing with two of the biggest tech companies in the US, but
Mhm.
eating at a food bank and hungry
Mhm. Mhm.
because she didn't have any money to buy food because she was saving every dime to stay in her apartment, and was really, like, underwater. And then at the same time, you're supposed to be, like, preparing for these technical interviews, right?
Yeah.
This is like February of her senior year, so she's in this job search area.
Mhm.
And so she only asked us for $3,000, and we talked to her and we're like, okay, make a spreadsheet of what is it going to take for you to walk across the stage in May and have that
Mhm.
degree. And so we ended up paying for rent every month until graduation. We gave grocery gift cards for every month,
Mhm.
paid off the car. I think we paid some graduation fees. All told, it was like $8,200.
Mhm.
And she graduated in June. She started at Microsoft in August. And in October, came back and said, it's the month of giving at Microsoft. And of course, you're my first choice, and has been giving to us ever since. But more importantly, has become a champion inside Microsoft with the other employees, telling them about our program, sharing. And so now we have this enormous partnership with Microsoft. And so, like, this idea of this virtuous circle, we're investing in young people who are going to come back, and they're going to invest in their peers. They're going to invest back in the organization. They're going to become champions for students like themselves, just like Ryan is for
Mhm.
all of our students. And so it's really, really powerful to see that happening already. I mean, we had only been operating, she was the 18th grant we gave, and she was the first person to make a donation. And the other thing that's really interesting is we've had students give donations of five figures, like well over $1,000. Now, I wasn't giving anybody $1,000 in charity until I was like 40 years old. So, like, I find that really impressive that these students are so grateful that they're like, absolutely, this is the organization that I'm going to support. And and we actually have a pretty high average of donations coming from corporate folks. And
Mhm.
when I've given talks, and I've given talks at big conferences, there's always somebody who comes up to me is like, I was that student. I wish I'd known about you. I wish that you existed when I was young. And I've heard young people be like, I got hired at Amazon and I moved to Seattle and lived in my car for a month
Mhm.
before I could get my relocation stipend. Like,
Mhm.
there's all of these systems in place that assume that everyone has access to credit and capital.
Yeah.
And so if this happened literally last fall, we had a student who had been offered a job at one of the big semiconductor companies in California, was expected to move from North Carolina to California for this job. Or it was Florida to California. And because of the timing, they were like, oh, we can't advance you any part of your relocation money because it's too close to the end of the year. And that would be an accounting problem. So you just get yourself to California and get an apartment all by yourself, and then we'll
Oh,
reimburse you.
okay.
Well, who has $10,000 of credit available when they're 21 years old to
Yeah.
get an apartment in Silicon Valley and move across the country at your own expense? Like, who has that money? Now, fortunately, we were able to resolve that problem without, paying for it directly. We just talked with the company and solved the problem. But I think a lot of companies don't realize that the systems that they have built for recruiting have assumptions of privilege built into them. And you actually are losing talent that comes from low income families, which is this really, amazing, resilient talent, because your systems don't adequately support them. Like expecting a student to, we had a student who was like, I couldn't check into the hotel for my interview because they wanted to put a $400 hold on my debit card.
Oh.
Now, if you don't have $400 in your bank account, which is very common for a student, that's a lot of money. She couldn't check into the hotel, which meant calling the recruiter and saying like, help, I can't check in. So that's like othering, and it hits your confidence like right before you go into the interview. So that's bad. But
Yeah.
also imagine if they had put that $400 hold on her account, she would be in San Francisco with no access to money until they release that hold in 4 or 5 days.
Yeah.
And so like the logistics, we can fix this. We can fix this with a credit product. We can fix this with a prepaid credit card, or like people just need to examine their systems and go, where in our systems have we assumed that everyone who goes to college comes from affluence? And that accessing these opportunities, a lot of conferences and other things that people are expected to go to, yes, they have scholarships, but they reimburse you. So you're supposed to buy a plane ticket. Now you got to buy that plane ticket, 6 weeks in advance or 4 weeks in advance, and then pay for a hotel, and then wait how many weeks to get reimbursed? Who can do that? People who have credit and capital. So even scholarships are not truly solving the issue when it comes to accessing these opportunities. So I'm advocating, like, as a community, if we want to truly resource talent that comes from low income communities, we have got to look at our systems that we think are helpful systems, but in fact are in many cases harmful systems.
And I was just wondering, like, so you were just talking about giving, this having this thought process of the corporate thought process of having privilege kind of inbuilt in their system. And do you see that changing anytime soon?
I think it is going to change. We've already worked with a number of companies that have started to examine their processes. And I think through a process of public recognition and public celebration of like, this is possible, and here's how you do it. And I'm still looking for that one big company to step up and be like, we're going to prepay all intern relocation. Looking for that. Some companies do. Microsoft, if you're interning at Microsoft, it's door to door. They handle getting you there. They handle housing. Everything is door to door. Other companies don't. And, this summer, I would say we are subsidizing a lot of students just being able to participate in their internships, because either the internship doesn't pay enough for them to afford housing where they live, or the internship doesn't give them any resources until they arrive. And so, you're supposed to like move there and get settled and get an apartment. In a short term, housing is always the hardest and most expensive. And then wait, 3 or 4 weeks to get whatever your housing stipend was. And
Mm,
I recall there was one company who, I'm not kidding you, their housing stipend for the whole summer was like $2,000. That's not even
oh,
going to pay 1 month. So
yeah.
like inflation has happened,
Mhm,
costs are higher, but the systems haven't changed and adapted yet. And
mhm,
so, um, we need to think broader about what that is. The other
yeah.
thing is just thinking about, what are the conditions you want to create so that so that interns have a good experience and want to come back. And so one of those things, and I think some companies have figured out this secret sauce, is like having them live together, having them have events with each other,
Yeah.
having them get to know each other and
Mhm,
connect. And especially when we're talking about underrepresented students like young women or young women of color, when there's so few of them, that sense of like belonging might not be there if you don't see others that look like you. And so
mhm,
a lot of my career has been spent on building communities for women in tech and making sure that they know each other, they're connected to each other. I think that's a really important component of the program. At minimum, in the first week of your summer internship program, make sure all those students meet and know how to find each other,
mhm,
because you may have some enormous campus where they're
mhm,
going off and they're spending all their time by themselves, but you want them to form relationships that will give them a sense of what it might be like to work there in the future.
mhm.
And you don't want them to sit there in isolation, especially if the team that you've put the student on is all like older people in their 40s and the student is like 20, and they're already going to feel like a square peg. And so you want to like make sure they're connected to some peers and also some role models.
Yeah, yeah. That's wonderful. And so, in conclusion, I would like to ask one question, which is what would be your advice to organizations or individuals who would want to operate in the same space as you are?
I think the first thing is think deeply about abundance, right? So um, I've had this conversation with lots of partners where they're like, well, how do you know that these students are going to use the money for what you want? Or how do you know that they're going to, like, I don't. I'm just believing in them.
Ruth, I think we kind of lost you for like two
A second.
minutes.
Do you want me to
Yeah,
start over? Oh, dear. Okay.
yeah.
Um,
Uh, yeah.
okay. Do you want to ask the question again?
Yeah, I'll do that. So in
Okay.
conclusion, I would like to ask you that what would your advice be to organizations and individuals who are working in a similar space and who want to provide the last mile assistance to students? And this could be organizations across the globe, so you need not have not being specific, region specific. Yeah,
Sure. I think one is to think about your processes and your belief systems around abundance and who deserves funding. Um, a really good example of this is like, are you asking for receipts? Is it necessary? Do you really want to create a administrative burden that's unnecessary? Or do you want to just be generous, believe in the students and say, here's the money? So you have to become risk tolerant, right?
hmm,
And so like how tolerant are you of risking
risk.
and betting this money
Hmm,
on a student and their success? The other thing that I think is important is we've surveyed our grantees and they say, the money helped me. It made it possible for me to get better grades. It made it possible for me to focus on school. But the
yeah,
second thing they say is the fact that you believed in me, that you said I was worthy of a scholarship,
yeah.
like gave me more confidence and more energy to keep going. And
Hmm,
so by investing from this like abundance viewpoint and investing in striving talent,
hmm,
you're propelling them so much further than rewarding someone who's already far ahead.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, like, it's a mind shift
Mm-hmm.
of like, you need to be willing to trust and you
Mm-hmm.
need to be willing to take risks and um, know that you're comfortable with the level of, reward you're going to get.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation, Ruth. It was really enlightening to talk about this because this is so niche and very innovative in its own way. And the approach, I really loved it, and I'm sure that listeners would also be inspired by it. So thank you so much for this conversation. And to our listeners, this is your host, Pavithra, signing off for today. So until next episode, thank you so much.